And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dr. Bruce Goldberg, who holds advanced degrees in dentistry and counseling psychology. He has an international hypnosis practice in Los Angeles. He's an author of many books, and he was inducted into the International Hypnosis Hall of Fame. Today, we're going to be talking about time travel and more. Dr. Goldberg, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Well, thank you. Today, we're going to be discussing a rather unique approach to my work, and that is actual time travelers from our future. I call them chrononauts. Now, this is not, I know they're featured in science fiction and the X-Files and TV and film and novels. That's all fine. But I deal with real time travelers, people from between 1,000 and 3,000 years in the future that have come back in time, not only now, but throughout history, which we will discuss, and have given us our technology and have also prevented us from being enslaved by the really nasty ETs that have come to this planet, which we will discuss too. So before I do that, just the basic terms. So the term chrononaut is what I use, like an astronaut, except it deals with time. That's what chronos. Chronos is from the Greek word that means time. So I call them chrononauts, and they come here and they travel through the fifth dimension. So when people do travel through the fifth dimension, and I can train patients of mine, as I've done this myself, to go out of the body as part of my work, then you become what I call an ultra-terrestrial, not an extraterrestrial, an ultra-terrestrial. That means traveling through the fifth dimension, because that's how they come here, and I will describe the technology. But before I do that, let me just give you the overview. The very first time traveler team that came to they went back into ancient Egypt first, but the basic team consisted of the Greys, what we would call the Greys. These are extraterrestrials that by the 25th century, they become citizens of our planet. So you might say they have their Grey card, if you get the drift here, okay? All right, so the Greys are your typical Steven Spielberg aliens. They have large black eyes. They stand 3 to 5 feet tall. They have grayish skins, no earlobes, 4 fingers and toes. Sometimes they appear as white or bluish in color, but they're all basically the same. And some are tall and slender, as you've seen some of the extraterrestrial reports, but these are the ones that come from the future. So how do you know if you're dealing with a futuristic gray versus a current century gray? The current century ones are pretty nasty. They don't really care about us. They just want sperm and egg samples, and they're very cold. The ones in the future are very spiritually oriented. All time travelers are very spiritually oriented. So these Greys will wear a one-piece uniform with a triangular shaped insignia. That means they're from the future. So if you see that, you're dealing with a cool Grey, not a creepy one. That's a difference. Now, there were 2 of them on their first team. They were sort of like the Gophers. They did the media work. The ones that were their supervisors were the hybrid time travelers, or chrononauts. These were, their skin ranged from whitish to bronze hues. They were 5 to 6 feet tall. They had these large faceted eyes and odd-looking foreheads. So from a distance, they look normal, like a Caucasian human. But the closer you got to them, the more you realize that you're not in Kansas anymore. Yeah. They look a little strange, okay? Now, the leader of the team would be a pure human. This would be and you'll see why most of them were Caucasian, not to make it racist. There's a reason for that, which I will describe. They were pure humans between 6 and 7 feet tall. They were blonde, blue-eyed, tanned, clean-shaven, and always appeared to be dressed in a white robe. Now, they were the leader of the team. So you say, why were they Caucasian? There were other races that we used as time travelers. The problem is when they went back in time, especially the primitive times, they were killed. The pure humans were worshipped as a god. Okay, so that's why the Caucasians dominate the pure human. Now, there are reptilian time travelers, but they're not part of a team. They're criminals. Reptilians are evil, no matter how you slice them. In the current century, we call them the Dracos because they come from the Draco civilization or the constellation. And they have wings, the current ones. The future ones don't. They're criminals. They escape and they go into the technology that I will describe shortly. So if you see a reptilian, you want to keep away from them because they're cannibalistic. They eat their mistakes. Pure evil. So they're nasty. But the regular time travelers are not. They're here for our spiritual growth. Because of the advanced technology, they can travel through hyperspace and move interdimensionally. They can interact with us in our dream levels. And this is very important because if you do your research, you'll find that 80% of scientific breakthroughs, what we would call the aha moment, or artistic breakthroughs, occur when people have dreams about them. That's because they're interacting with time travelers. Time travelers give us our technology. It's not the government. It's not Bill Gates or Microsoft or Yahoo or Google or Yahoo. No. Yeah, they give us technology. Where do they get it from? They get it from time travelers. These beings or futuristic humans, as well as ETs, they remain invisible when they're traveling into the fifth dimension, so you're not going to see them. They have advanced medical techniques such as what we call quantum medicine, which means if a time traveler is killed or dies for any reason, if they're caught between 24 hours, there's a machine or little laser pointer they can use to resuscitate the dead time traveler and bring them back to life. But after 24 hours, forget it, not going to work. So this is called quantum medicine. They can also regenerate a lost limb, just like a starfish, you know? If you have a starfish, you take a limb off, they reset, or a lizard can resuscitate, or an earthworm, they can regenerate lost limbs or parts of their body. The time travelers or chrononauts can do that. So they're very interesting. Now, the way time traveler was developed was around the year 3050, 31st century. A man named Tatos, T-A-A-T-O-S, he is the Da Vinci of the future. He is a physicist, a physician, a philosopher, quantum physicist, etc. He is a brilliant man, and he develops what's called a wormhole linear accelerator. We call that the WLA. This is a device that enlarges a wormhole, which is microscopic normally, into classic size. So him and his crew can go into the fifth dimension and travel back in time. Now, there's a man here in Southern California, a astrophysicist named Kip Thorne. He is a brilliant man, astrophysicist. He was the one that worked with remember the movie Contact?
Yes.
You know, about, okay. He was the one who worked out the theoretical aspects to make that movie reasonably scientifically accurate. He's the one who outdebated, many other physicists in his time. So he's a brilliant guy. And by the way, he's in Pasadena in Caltech. Caltech is rated higher than MIT. That's the kind of school it is, right? It's a brilliant university. Anyway, back in 1988, he wrote an article in a technical journal called Physical Review Letters, where he talks about how an advanced civilization can increase a wormhole to classic size and go back in time. So this is all scientifically documented, at least the theory. We don't have the technology to do it today, and we won't for 1,000 years, but we will. Okay, so that's Tatos's thing. So when Tatos came back in time, he had a crew initially, and his crew were basically all Caucasian time travelers before they did the grays and the hybrids. That was later on. So the first team of time travelers, listen to the names: Tatos, Geb, Isis, Horus, and Osiris. Those were the names of the time travelers. That ring a bell?
Yep.
You go, and by the way, they went back to ancient Egypt first, around 3,000, 4,000 BC. They were the gods of ancient Egypt. Okay, they were part of the Osirian cult, and Osiris is the god of the dead and all this kind of stuff. Isis is the god of healing, etc. So, of course, if you go back in time, can you imagine primitive Egyptians seeing these people coming in a craft through a wormhole? all of a sudden, with advanced technology, you're either going to kill them or you're going to worship them as a god. They choose the latter. By the way, Tatos was known as Thoth by the ancient Egyptians. The Greeks called him Hermes. So that was Tatos. So Hermes is the one that invented the wormhole linear accelerator. Okay, so for the next 2,000 years or so, the wormhole linear accelerator is used to go back in time. The problem with that is that you create tears in the fabric of space-time when you do that. And that causes some of the weather anomalies, some of the weird things that happen, like, crabs falling from the sky, the Fortean phenomena, we call that. If you know Charles Fort's work from the 1930s and 40s. So that was a problem. By the 35th century, time travel will be done by teleportation. So you don't have to worry about tears in the fabric of space-time, but not for a good 2,500 years. Okay, so, there's a problem with that. So let me give you some of the technology that these people developed. The 35th century, when teleportation will be used for time traveler, is the greatest single century in mankind's history. It's very spiritual, and the technology is unbelievable. So let me give you examples. One of them is called the anti-gravity amusement park. It's sort of like Disneyland. They call it the land of Tatos to celebrate Tatos. And this is an amusement park that's about 3,000 feet above the earth. It's got a force field around it, so idiots won't fall over the edge, okay, And what the advantage of this amusement park is, you can actually go back in time. You're guided by one of their workers, and if you want to spend a couple of hours in ancient Renaissance or ancient Rome or Egypt or Greece, that's what it's called, the land of Tatos, okay? Then there's a device called a food simulator. I call this the Mind Witch machine. It looks like a microwave, except your thoughts create the food. So if you want the proverbial chicken sandwich, you just send your thoughts out to this machine. It creates it. It's perfectly healthy, very nutritious. You can eat as much as you want and you won't gain weight. So it's an ideal device. Then there's a really significant device called the Alpha Singularium. This looks like an isolation tank, except when you lie in it, it sends energy and sound to your body, increasing the production of the hormone DHEA, which eventually becomes testosterone in man and estrogen in women. And this hormone in the intermediary state called DHEA will stimulate the production of T lymphocytes and other parts of the immune system, which will extend the life processes. The average 35th citizen lives between 500 and 900 years young. Think of the Old Testament and all those guys that lived to be 900 years old. Methuselah, Adam, people like that, right? Methuselah, he lived to be 969 and then he died. The oldest human history, according to the Old Testament. Well, that may not be out of the picture here if you deal with time travels. Okay, they also have these holographic relaxation centers, sort of like what you see on Star Trek. So if you want to go on vacation, but you can't afford to, or you don't have the time, in your own apartment or home, you can create this relaxation center and go to your little trip without having to do anything strange. Okay, so these time travelers, now they're here for our spiritual growth. So let me give you a good example of a case history. There's a woman, and I refer to this in my Time Travelers from Our Future book. These case histories that I'm reporting are detailed in there. So I'm just going to give you a summary if they want to read the details of that, with the many exercises I have in my book to help you to go out of the body and to actually meet time travelers. You can actually meet them too.
Which book are you referring to?
This is Time Travelers from Our Future.
Okay.
Okay. All my books, by the way, have many exercises about self-hypnosis. In fact, before I describe that, I want to give an offer for your audience. My most current book is called Exploring the Fifth Dimension, which deals with teleportation, out-of-body experiences, and parallel universes. If your viewers order my book from my site, not from a bookstore, they won't do this. I will send them an autographed copy of the book if they pay for the book, and they will get a free CD called Fifth Dimensional Travel, which will guide them out of the body and explore the various things we're discussing today. They can also review past lives, future lives, parallel lives, all the fun things that I deal with. So let's talk about Wendy. So Wendy was a woman. She had a lot of problems. She lived in Los Angeles. She was depressed, overweight, bad relationships, terrible job. And she was not a happy camper. So in between the times that I would work with her in my Los Angeles office doing hypnotherapy, she would be abducted, taken on a craft, thousands of feet above the earth, okay? And she's working with this pure human chrononaut. And he's putting her in like a room, a conference room, and he's showing her holograms of her past lives. And he's trying to educate her, and he's following her life after life after life. So I said, okay. And again, I'd see her on a Monday, and by Thursday, she's being abducted. So one thing she describes, the abductions were very harmless. She was being very spiritually helped and healed with them as well as my work. So she goes, Doctor, there's something very strange about my abductions. And I said, just one thing, what's that? And she said, the time travel that I'm working with, all communication is telepathy. He says, while she's being shown these various scenes of her being murdered, abducted, abandoned, beaten up, treated like garbage in all these past lives, he goes, he's very emotional. It's almost like he's about to cry when he shows me these scenes. Why is that? And I said, look, Wendy, I don't know this guy. Why don't you ask him the next time you're abducted? Because you're going to be abducted again, okay? And she said, I can't do that. I said, sure you can. It's all done telepathically. Just simply say, why are you so emotionally involved with my past lives and my problems? So she goes, okay. So the next time I see her, she was abducted. I said, so what's the update? She said, well, I did ask him that. And he told me the reason why he's so emotional is because, and I'm speaking as her now, I am his great grandmother. They're allowed to work with their ancestors, and they do. So that's Wendy's case. By the way, after working with her and completing my therapy, the time traveler gave her a final message before the abductions ended. He said, you are going to meet a man with a red hair driving a white Corvette. Do not reject this man. And she said, whatever, okay. She's in her early 30s, right? So I complete my case with her, and I said, Wendy, we're all done, but I want you to keep me posted. Keep me updated, because she told me about the red hair and the white Corvette. And I said, I think that's going to be significant, but, keep me posted. She calls me 6 months later, and she tells me she went to the local mall. She met a man with red hair, okay, called him Frank, and he drove a white Corvette. They started dating, and a year and a half later, they were married, and she has a baby boy. And I said, now, Wendy, you realize that your son is going to grow up, and he's going to have kids. And in about 1,200 years, they're going to have a time traveler in the family for Christmas. You know what I mean? You got that? So that was Wendy's case. Now, Tina's case is a little bit more exotic. Tina and her son were both abducted, and they were taken to an underground military base in the Northwest. Well, not Southwest, actually. It was probably New Mexico. So what do we have here? She's in a military base. She's got grays, okay, and Air Force uniforms. That means a United States conspiracy with the ETs and the abduction mentality, right? So this tall, thin gray comes up to her telepathic and says, we want to introduce you to someone that's very important. Now, she doesn't know what to do. She's in an underground base. She's got no control over her life. She's worried about her safety, right? And the military guy said, look, don't worry, you're going to be protected. So they bring out this, now before I have to give you the history, Tina, when she was about 15 years old, went to the gynecologist. She had problems, and the gynecologist did scans on her and said, Tina, you're pregnant. And Tina said, I can't be, I'm a virgin. What are you talking about? She goes, look, the ultrasound doesn't lie. You're pregnant. And she said, okay. She goes, I want to see you in a couple of weeks. So she comes back in a couple of weeks, and the gynecologist said, I have to apologize to you. I don't know what would happen. There are things called pseudo pregnancies. It is a medical syndrome. You're no longer pregnant. Did you pass any blood or any whatever? She goes, no, I've been fine. She goes, okay, you're no longer pregnant. Bye-bye. Enjoy yourself. Okay. So now we fast forward about 16 years, 17 years. Now she's in her 30s. In the underground military base, this tall, thin gray brings a hybrid teenager to her, half human, half ET, calls her Anna, and he goes, this is your daughter. They took sperm and egg samples. She was abducted. She didn't realize it at the time. They took egg samples. They did the mixture. They did the usual technology. And she goes, well, why are you introducing me to this daughter of mine? He says, because we don't have the emotional component that you have. We don't know how to deal with her. And we want her to meet her mother. So she met the mother. Now, she didn't adopt the kid. Kid stayed in the military base. She was given a tour of the underground military base, and as she's passing by a laboratory, they have these big jars with fetuses in various stages of development, encompassed in liquid, various colors of liquid, blue and green and all kinds of exotic. Underground military base, hybrid ETs, half human, half ETs. This is your tax dollars at work. Okay. So that was the example of Tina. So this shows you that the government has always been involved with ETs. There is something called, just for the benefit of your audience, there is something called the Greater Treaty, which is a very important treaty. It occurred in 1952 in February, 1954 in February. Now, in 1954, Dwight David Eisenhower was president. If you know anything about Dwight David Eisenhower, he was, the guy who was the chairman of our military during World War II. He was a brilliant general. He was, just a very likable person. All right, he loved to play golf. He loved to play golf more than Donald Trump. I mean, this guy was a golfer. So it's February. He's in Palm Springs playing golf. He's been in office for about, a couple of years. And 3 years. And the president, his whereabouts is always known to the media and the government. In other words, you're never going to see a president disappear for 24 hours unless he's dead. And even then, it's going to be reported. So Dwight David Eisenhower, early February of 1954, a Jeep comes up to the golf course and says, Mr. President, I need to take you to Edwards Air Force Base. It's an emergency. Okay. The media does not cover him. We have no records of what happened for 24 hours to Eisenhower, which is unheard of. So what happened, as was reported later, he goes to the base. He's being driven up to this big driveway, whatever you want to call it, Edwards Air Force Base. There's a UFO on the concrete driveway there, right? So Eisenhower knows something is up. He goes into the conference room. There's a bunch of generals. Many of them he knew, some of them from the Pentagon, et cetera, but he knew these guys. And then they said, Mr. President, we need to introduce you to someone, and we have a very serious issue. Door opens up, and a gray comes in, sits down at the table. Eisenhower knows this is not cool. And the gray telepathically says, Mr. President, we need to make a deal with you, a treaty. He says, What? What's your treaty? He says, we need to abduct some of your citizens. Not many, just a few hundred, to do experiments. We're not going to kill them or harm them, but we need to abduct them because we have fertility issues. And in exchange for that, we're going to give you advanced technology. We're going to put you well ahead of the Soviet Union and everybody else on this planet. And you're going to have space travel, and you're going to have technology that you can't even fantasize about right now. But you have to agree to this treaty. So what's Eisenhower going to do? He realizes these ETs could probably wipe out the planet. How did they get here? They're 25 light years away. Zeta Reticuli, right? So he says, okay, it's a deal, all right? Now, And that is the reason why we got the exchange. Of course, the ETs lied to him. They've abducted over 8 million Americans, and that's a conservative estimate from years ago. I don't know what it is now, but it's at least 8 million Americans have been abducted by these creeps, okay? Now, the problem with this treaty was that he could have been impeached for that because the treaty has to be presented to the Senate and it has to be confirmed by 2/3 of the senators. The Senate never heard about this treaty. So it was an unconstitutional / illegal treaty, but it was done. And by the way, we're not the only country that made deals with the ETs. How do you think the Soviets had the first Sputnik, right? They had the first satellite in outer space before we beat them up years later, right? It's 57 Sputnik, okay? So that's an example of how time travelers. Now that was just a regular ET. That wasn't a time travel. That was an ET from the current century. So there are certain technologies that that the time travelers have that I want to review to show you how advanced they are. Remember, my research, and I've actually met certain time travelers. I've met about 8 of them, and my patients, of course, have met them, and I report them in my Time Travels from Our Future book and my Egypt book and Extraterrestrial and Time Travel Experiment book. So I give the technology in there, but here's an example of things that they have. There's a device called the Time Sequence Nullification Unit, TSNU, which patches ripple points in the fabric of space-time. Remember I told you when they come back using the WLA, the Wormhole Linear Accelerator, they do cause tears in the fabric of space-time. Now, they can't patch them all up because there's been many, many trips, but they do their best to patch up whatever they can. Then there's something called the morphogenic cell regulator, or the MCR, which renders a time traveler invisible when they come back to our 3-dimensional world. It can also alter their physical appearance so that they can shapeshift and look like someone that you may know, right? So they can do that. And they do that not to harm us. They do that because a man in black will kill them if they see them. There are men in black. And if they see a time traveler or know there's a time travel, they will take them out.
Why?
They can change their DNA, they can change their fingerprints by using this MCR approach. Then there's a device called a suspended animation device, or SAD, which is like a luminous red ball of light that places people in suspended animation that freezes them so that you can't do anything. For example, there are cases of mine where a guy was walking in the inner city, in a rather large city with a high crime rate, and there was a bunch of gang members in a car about to do a drive-by shooting. A time traveler was there, sees the car with the punks, puts them into suspended animation so the guy can leave the scene and not be killed. You say, why would the time traveler save this guy? The reason being is because their research showed that this guy's progeny in the future would be very significant to our society. So if he was killed, that would cause a ripple in the space-time continuum, and that would not be cool. So that's why they would do things like that. Some of the experiences that people talk about, angelic situations or spirit guide contact, some of them are time travelers. Now, there are spirit guides and there are angels, yes. My humble philosophy and belief system, but time travelers can actually do that.
Is it possible to come back and alter the time in a negative way? And if so, is there some sort of time police created to prevent that?
Yes, that's a very good question. It's sort of like Back to the Future's Part 2, if you ever saw that film.
Yeah.
A good example of that. All right. So there are criminals in the future. The reptilians are good examples of that. But there are humans that are criminals that are escaping being prosecuted for various crimes. And they can steal a wormhole linear accelerator, or, because there are a lot of them around. Tato's developed many of them. Now, if they try to do that, there are police forces in the future that will prevent that from happening, because that would literally destroy the future. Now, there are people that are very angry. They're sort of like terrorists. Think of a terrorist. That's a good example. These are time traveler terrorists. They're not part of the government. They're not part of Tartos's team or anybody else that succeeded him. No, these are creeps. They want to destroy the world. They're like Hamas or Hezbollah or some Iranian terrorist or whatever. Yeah, but there are police that can prevent them. They can send their team back in time to bring those people back, to remove their association with the WLA, the machine, and patch up the ripple points if they begin to just do something negative. So there are technology and police forces in the future that can help prevent that, or else we would have big problems. Remember, the reason why these time travelers or chrononauts are so spiritual and help us is because they're us in the future. So if we screw up this world, they're not going to exist. It's going to be like Michael J. Fox's hand disappearing in Back to the Future Part 1, you know? That. Yeah. So they are very concerned about what we do. And that's why they're protective. Now, that device that I talked about earlier to resuscitate a time travel that died within 24 hours is called the Intergalactic Line Healer, or the ILH. That is the one that can, it's like a little pen flashlight. And when you zip it along the body, it can resuscitate the person's to life, to bring back their life. Now, there is also something called there's a way in which if a time traveler is on the Earth in our physical three-dimensional world, and they stay here for 5 years, now they become a timeliner, which means the Men in Black can't detect them. They can stay here forever. So some of these time travelers, like I mentioned, Tatos and Geb and Isis, they were pharaohs in ancient Egypt. They were literally pharaohs, and they were there for many years. They could have been there for 100 years or more. Remember, they lived very long. So because they were here for 5 years or more, they became a timeliner. So the Men in Black wouldn't be able to come back and kill them or kill them at that time. Because the Men in Black trace people all throughout history. They definitely do their thing to cause problems. Now, let's talk about the Men in Black for a moment. There are 4 kinds of Men in Black. Now, look, forget about the movie The Men in Black. That's a comedy. That had nothing to do with reality. By the way, I'll show you something before I discuss the Men in Black. So the first Men in Black movie was 1998. It was August, if I remember correctly. And later that evening, I was on a radio interview, a network radio interview in Los Angeles. So the woman who's the host of the show, she said, Bruce, I'd like you to do the show, because the movie just came out that day, right? You know, I said, okay. She goes, I'm going to have the screenplay writer as my guest. So you and the screenplay writer can have a conversation. Okay. Now, I'm a scholar, okay? I've written 21 books in my field. I've written 24 scientific articles. So I have a scholarly approach to my work. So quantum physics, quantum mechanics is the basis of my work. So I figured, let me see what kind of a background this guy has. Well, the guy's a screenplay writer, right? With the IQ of room temperature, right? So I said to him, so tell me, what was your research for the movie? Did you go back into the 1940s, the 1950s research, or go back into ancient time? There were Men in Black going back into ancient Africa, going back 2,000 years ago. There are records of that, by the way. He said, no. I said, so what was your research? He goes, the comic book called Men in Black. That was my research. I said, brilliant. I said, you and I are not going to be exchanging Nobel Peace Prizes very soon, okay? The guy was an idiot. Okay, it was a funny movie, but it was not relevant. Okay, so there are 4 kinds of Men in Black. Let's discuss them. One is the AFSAC, or Air Force Special Activities Center unit of the U.S. Air Force, the 1127th Field Activities Group. That is the branch of the people that drive Cadillacs, that have license plates you can't check on. And if you see a UFO, they're the ones that knock on your door with their very cold, scientific, atheistic, arrogant, threatening mentality. Guys that you used to see on X-Files, that is the AFSAC people. They're real. Oh, yeah. And they've been around for a long time, since at least the 40s, since, you've had your major UFO sightings in the 40s and beyond. Then there is something called the Black Brotherhood. Again, folks, this is not racist. I don't make up the names. It refers to the lower astral entities from the lower astral plane. These are the entities that create psychic attack, that cause negative depression in people. They can't kill you, but they can harass you. And there's a brotherhood or a group of them. And they also like to knock off time travelers or any ETs that are observed by our civilization. Then there are extraterrestrials themselves that are on the third dimension, our dimension. There are extraterrestrials in different constellations that don't like people knowing about the time travels. They will try to kill them. And then there is there are some aspects of the police force from the future, the time travels police force, that don't want people in the current century to know that there's a time traveler around. They're nasty. They're the equivalent of the AFSAC Air Force people we have today. So they're not cool at all. Remember, the governments always have evil aspects to them. Governments have always been known to be evil. Okay, and so those are the four kinds of men in black. You're usually not going to run into them unless you have a direct innervation with a time traveler or an ET. If they connect with you, yeah, you're gonna activate them, and that would be the equivalent of the men in black. So that's why we always have to be concerned about men in black. Now, remember, I told you they trace you back in history. So here's an example of what I call an ET war in ancient Egypt. Now, these cases I'm referring to now are in my Egypt book. It's called Egypt, an extraterrestrial and time traveler experiment. So this is a guy, I call him Bernie, not his real name. He lived in Egypt about 9,500 BC, all right? This is after the flood, by the way. There was a great flood about 10,500 BC. So he lived in a place called Sais, S-A-I-S, which is in Lower Egypt, which would be the Cairo area today. It wasn't called Cairo then, okay? And he worked as a carpenter, and his name wasn't Jesus, okay? It was Bernie. I call him Bernie anyway. He described several instances during his work when it was interrupted by loud noises and flashes of light. So what was taking place was an ET war between the ET race called the Lyrans, which are the bad guys, and the reptilian race, which are even worse than the Lyrans. So they had these advanced devices, these like laser beams, and they were killing each other and killing a lot of, humans, Egyptians at the time. These laser beam devices were used on flying saucer ships to destroy buildings and killing hundreds of people. Bernie described the completed Sphinx at the time, and this is 9,500 BC. Think of the numbers here. And the Great Pyramid of Giza being about 1/3 constructed at the time. Think about this, okay? All right, this corroborated reports from my other patients. Now, suddenly, another series of highly advanced ships entered into the scene, and the ETs were outnumbered, and these ships were technologically more advanced, and they were able to negotiate a treaty and stop the war. The chief of the these newer advanced people, beings, so to speak, in their ships, the head of it was a tall, blonde, human, Caucasian, with blue eyes, wearing a white robe, and he was a time traveler from the 35th century. And he was the one that said, guys, lighten up. If you don't, we're going to take you out. So the reptilians and the Greys, or the Lyrans, I should say, they went bye-bye. They went back to their constellation. Now, the Lyrans were here hundreds of thousands of years ago. They actually helped to genetically modify Homo erectus to create modern man indirectly through Homo heidelbergensis as our immediate predecessor. But Homo erectus was around for 2 million years. They were a very long-lasting, 7 times what we've been around. The Lyrans were here trying to enslave us, trying to have us do all the media work for them. And then after they arrived, the Syrians from the Syrian constellation, they were our protectors. So they were the ones that helped to fight off the Lyrans. So that's why we're not enslaved. Now, the first time travel that I met, just to go through, he's on the cover of my Time Travel Smart future book. His name is Traxa. Now, Traxa is just his name for his mission. He's had at least 3 different future lives as a time traveler. But when I met him, he was from the 36th century. And I met him in the 5th dimension by using my out-of-body experience technique. And he communicated with me telepathically in the 5th dimension. And I said, so who are you? He said, well, I'm from the 36th century, blah, blah, blah. And I said, so what's your name? He says, well, you can call me Traxa. He said, that's related to my mission. And I said, well, what does that mean? What does Traxa mean? So he says, spell it out, Traksa. If you spell it backwards, it says, ask Art. He was the one who introduced me to Art Bell in 1993, actually, where I worked on the show in 1994. And that became eventually George Norrie on Coast to Coast. So I said, am I the only one you work with? He goes, no, 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 no. He says, I work with other people, but for you, you can call me Traxer. I said, well, why me? Why are you so concerned about my media career, right? He says, because your work is known in the 36th century. I said, really? Do I get royalties from my book, Past Lives, Future Lives, from the 36th century? He says, no, your work is known. He says, I said, okay, great, thank you. So anyway, so that's Traxer. Now, Traxer is kind of funny because what he does is he comes back in time many times. And there was a meeting in Chicago. This goes back to the late 90s. It was a scientific meeting, physicists, astronomers, etc. So Traxer decided to attend a meeting. I guess maybe he was trying to stimulate their thought processes. Remember, he can interact with them during the dream levels, right? So apparently, when he was in this big convention center or this big meeting hall, there was a private detective. I don't know what this guy was doing there. Traxer tells me the story later on. So this private detective was in that meeting room for whatever reason, and he sees him, and he thinks something is weird about this guy. So he decides to follow him. So Traxer leaves the conference center, walks down the street in Chicago, maybe Michigan Avenue, whatever, and he goes into a coffee shop. The PI traces him, follows him into the coffee shop. So Traxer is there. He conveniently places his fingerprints on the coffee cup and on the glass of water, the little glass there, right? He knows he's being followed. And then he has his little lunch, and then he leaves the coffee shop. The PI goes up to the waitress, says, excuse me, ma'am, but I need to get this coffee cup and this glass. I'll pay you for it, And she goes, okay, whatever. And he takes it to the FBI and he runs a check on it. And guess what he finds out? Nothing, because the guy's fingerprints won't be around for 1,500 years.
Right.
Traxer likes to do little games like that.
You
Sure.
mentioned that the time travelers work through the 5th dimension and you met them in the 5th dimension.
Right.
What is the 5th dimension?
Okay, so and remember, your viewers can also meet them. If they go to my homepage, I have a CD program, and they could get MP3 files of it called Time Travelers Training Program, where there are 6 different titles to go through the out-of-body experiences and to actually get them into a conference room. I call this a sanctuary, so to speak, in the 5th dimension to actually meet a time traveler or their higher self or a spirit guide. So let's talk about the 5th dimension. So length, width, and depth represent our 3-dimensional world, right?
Yes.
Time is considered the 4th dimension. It really isn't a dimension. It's just a mathematical concept. Physicists use it for their equations. So when we talk about time itself, that is dimension number 4, okay? Anything beyond time, like the astral plane, those of the people who go out of the body, they go into the astral plane. There's also the causal, mental, etheric, and soul plane, if you want to deal with some of the other dimensions. And those represent the 5th dimension. Now, according to quantum mechanics, if you deal with the string theory, there are 26 dimensions. If you do the reverse, if you go counterclockwise, it's very complicated, but let's just say mathematically there are 26 dimensions according to quantum mechanics and string theory, okay? I only deal with 5. I like to keep it simple. My attention span is gone after 5 anyway. So let's keep it the 5th dimension. So when you go into the 5th dimension, you actually go out of the body every night. When you go to sleep at night, you go into a force. Now I'm going to deal with neurology. Remember, I have a medical degree. So I'm going to talk about neurology here. This is not airyfairy.com. This is not metaphysics. If you don't like metaphysics, I do, but that's okay. We have a First Amendment right here. This is actually neurology, neurophysiology. When you go to sleep at night, you go through a 4-stage sleep cycle. You go from the beta brainwave, which is the normal level that you're in now, the critical analytical short attention span, what I call that the Gen Z phase, I call that. And then you go through the alpha, theta, which is very deep sleep. And then you go through the alpha again into the REM cycle. So the stage 4 of a sleep cycle, which is about an hour and a half to 2 hours at the most. Stage 4 is the REM cycle, where you're actually dreaming. Rapid eye movements is what the REM cycle means. So when you're dreaming, you're actually in the 5th dimension. The soul leaves the body, it leaves a clone of itself, like an alias on a computer, so that you're not going to be possessed by some Black Brotherhood idiot from the lower astral plane. And the soul will now occupy your spiritual body. If you go into the astral plane, you're going to occupy the astral body. If you go to the causal plane, you occupy the causal body, whatever. So that's the 5th dimension. So every night, the average person spends 3 hours in the REM cycle. This has been documented since the 1950s. There's no argument. Medicine always had arguments. It's like politics, but there are certain things that we don't argue about. We don't argue about DNA. We don't argue about cell physiology. We don't argue about the REM cycle. We don't, because there's 70 years of research. So when you're in the 5th, now they may argue about the out-of-body experience, welcome their opinion, but there's research to show that exists. Anyway, so the average person is out of the body. The problem is you don't remember what's going on. Think of things such as lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is actually an out-of-body experience where you're aware that you're dreaming when you're dreaming, number 1. And number 2, you can manipulate the variables. You can change the plot of the dreaming. So if some monster is chasing you, you can use a laser beam to destroy the monster or send them away. Okay, that's called lucid dreaming. It's an out-of-body experience. So everybody goes out of the body. The problem is you don't remember it, so people can't do it consciously. So my programs train them to do it consciously. So going into the 5th dimension, to meet a time traveler in a sanctuary, is nothing but, think of it like as a lucid dream, except it's more powerful than that. And you can actually meet a time traveler. They're very busy. It's not easy to do it. It's a numbers game. It's going to take you many, many instances and attempts to do that. But if you're conscientious and patient, you'll be able to do it. You can meet your higher self. You can meet the positive ETs, the Syrians or the Pleiadians. They're all Arcturians. They're all positive. You can meet your departed loved relatives, or a dog or a pet that has died. You can overcome bereavement by doing that. There's so many elements to healing. Remember, the time travelers, their theme is healing and spiritual growth, because they want to help us, because we help them when they help us. So let me give you an example of documentation of some other people that have observed time travelers. In the Mutual UFO Journal of November 1980, they reported a case in England. This was in Italy, excuse me. This is the Naval Air Base at Catania, where the military people observed 2 golden-haired, white-robed beings accompanied by 3 or 4 shorter beings. And they called them the Jesus Christ types because they had long blonde hair, tall, slender, and who wore robes. Isn't that interesting? And belted robes, etc. So this is an example of the military documenting that. Raymond Fowler, a very famous author who wrote The Watchers and Watchers 2, his sequel book to it, where he describes how Betty Anderson, his main subject, described Greys worked for tall robed elders, blue-eyed Nordic type beings who did a form of energy healing surgery. So again, we have now the very famous case, of course, is the UFO sighting in Brentwood's Air Force Base in England between December 26, 1980 and December 28th. There have been documentaries on the History Channel on this. Brentwood's Air Force Base in England. Just Google it, folks, and you'll get the detail. Sergeant James Penniston described time travelers who said they are us in the future. They communicate by telepathy. They make a lot of errors, and they came from 1,000 years in the future. So now we have corroboration of people and military people, as well as regular humans, to document and to corroborate my work. So I am very impressed with that, because corroboration, you get people who don't meet each other from all over the world, and they tell you the same thing. That means it's true. That's circumstantial evidence of truth. So this is an example of what time travelers represent. They're here. They've always been here. They've been through every civilization. Unfortunately, the men in black have also been around for at least a couple of thousand years. In my book, Time Travels from Our Future, I have a separate chapter on men in black, and I give you the history. The history, not just from the 1940s, which of course, you can read those, in 50s, et cetera, but going back in time into ancient Africa and other civilizations where there have always been men in black. The governments were primitive, but they were interacting with these men in black. And that's how we created the technology, the art of writing, the wheel that we get from Sumeria, Egypt, with its advanced technology about military equipment, going into the Iron Age, the chariots that actually came from Israel, which the Jewish people that came into Egypt in 1800 BC, they brought chariots in there. Again, what's the odds? Why would primitive man all of a sudden come up with this? We could have done this 100,000 years ago. Our species has been around for 300,000 years. Why has it been with only in the last couple of hundred years that we've had all this advanced technology? And the last 50 years, the last 30 years? This doesn't make any sense. We have less raw material now than we did hundreds of thousands of years ago. We've got brilliant minds. Our mind hasn't changed. The brain case hasn't changed. So why now? Because we've had interaction with ETs and time travelers. That's why. They were our mentors. That's why.
Do you think that the ETs gave Tatos the information on how to build the machine, or did he use Kip Thorne's ideas?
No, I think Tatos did it himself. I think he used Kip Thorne's research about the enlarging the wormhole with you have to use exotic matter, which has negative mass that we can't produce today. Super colliders are trying to do that, but they're a long way from doing it. So I think Tatos developed it himself. Now, Tatos could have channeled in time travelers from 100 or 200 or 1,000 years beyond him. I don't doubt that. But I think it was a human development, again, to do that technology.
Was the purpose of the pyramids ever revealed to you?
Well, it wasn't revealed to me by any of the time travelers, but if you do the research about the pyramid, let's take the Pyramid of Giza, the limestone that was used to align it, et cetera, which was removed because of earthquakes in Cairo in about the 13th century. So they removed the limestone for reconstruction. But if you look at it, it's actually a energy generator, because the ancient Egyptians knew about electricity. They also knew about anti-gravity. That's how the Pyramid of Giza was built. That's how the various megaliths of ancient times, Stonehenge, and you go through all these things, that's how they were built. The Pyramid of Giza is what, 3 million stones? I don't know how many thousands of tons, perfectly aligned within 1/8 of an inch of accuracy, facing perfectly north, south, east, and west, giving us pi, all the mathematical symbols, which I detail in my Egypt book, by the way. Other people have done that too. We can't do that today. In fact, the Pyramid of Giza, Japan, Tokyo, in 1979, they tried to duplicate the Pyramid of Giza using what they thought was ancient technology, and they failed. Then they used modern technology, cranes, and all kinds of things, and they failed again. So we can't in the 20th, well, that was the 20th century, we can't today recreate what the Egyptians did, and it wasn't 2500 BC. I told you 9500 BC is when the Sphinx was already constructed and the Pyramid of Giza was being built. So we're talking many thousands of years. And by the way, the water erosion of the Sphinx shows us that it was much older than 2500 BC. Robert Schoch from Boston University's work will detail that if you want to Google it. And he's a scientist. He's got a PhD in geology, and he's not an idiot. So again, we have scientific evidence to support the paradigms. What I think is fun for your audience is to read about this. They get my The Time Travel Smart YouTube book and my e-book book. And if they get my Exploring the Fifth Dimension book, which will give them much more details about how to go out of the body, they'll get a free CD. Just mention the podcast. They do have to mention the podcast. And if they buy the book from my site, not from Amazon or Borders or any other bookstore, they will get a free fifth dimensional CD, which will guide them out of the body into hypnosis. And they can experience all the things that we're discussing today.
Is there any danger to traveling to different realms like the fifth dimension?
I've done over 3,000 out-of-body experiences myself. I would be talking to you from the lower astral plane if this was dangerous. In fact, in the research, and there's been a lot of research on out-of-body experience, various universities in America, and I'm sure around the world have done that. There has never been a case of any danger. Nobody's died. No psychological disturbances, no spiritual problems, nothing. Nada, because it's a natural experience. We're out of the body for 3 hours a night in the REM cycle, every night when we dream. So it's natural. It's au natural. That's why I love it. Everything I do is natural. And by the way, when you do these techniques, folks, don't smoke pot. Don't use any recreational drugs. Don't drink alcohol. If you do, you're going to wind up on the lower astral plane. And don't use ayahuasca either. I got a real problem with that. Okay? Big time.
Why is that?
Because it's a drug. It's a hallucinogenic. And you're going to wind up, you're always going to go to the lower astral plane. You're contaminating the chakra links. You're going to leave with the third chakra, not the seventh one, which is what you want to leave above the crown of the head. Any recreational drug will take you to the lower astral plane. Trust me, you don't want to be there. Yeah, you'll be out of the body, but you're going to have Darth Vader and Dick Cheney chasing you around for 3 hours.
I was checking out your YouTube channel and I noticed you have a video there of you working with Jerry Springer. Have you worked with
Yes,
lots
I
of
took him into a
celebrities?
past life. The late Jerry Springer, may he rest in peace. He was very kind to me. May you rest in peace, Jerry. I did a future life progression with him too, but I just have about a 2-minute clip of the past life regressions that I did. They can get from my YouTube channel. If they go to my homepage in the upper right-hand corner, they can click on my YouTube channel, and there's 55 videos. I've worked with many people. You've got a time traveler contactee on there, a UFO contactee on there, regressions, progressions. A psychic attack was removed on the air live in San Diego many years ago. There are workshops of mine. I was in India a few years ago. That workshop is on there. There are some of my interviews with Art Bell is on there too. So there's a lot of good clips on there. They can learn a lot about my work. And my website has about 35 different articles on there. And there are exercises. They can practice the techniques. So there's a lot of material they can do that.
Do you have anything else that you're working on that you want people to know about?
No, I do a lot of workshops, and they can check my website if I'm doing something, a speaking engagement. It'll always be on there. So it's www.dr for Dr. drbrucegoldberg.com. That has all the information. And if they want to do therapy with me, most of my patients, almost all of them, are done by Zoom. So I have patients from all over the world. My 21 books are translated in 21 languages. So I see patients from all over the world. So if they want to see me, they don't have to come to Los Angeles. Almost all of my patients, 95% of them, are done by Zoom. So all the information, there's a hypnotherapy sessions link on the top of the homepage, which gives all the fees and all the information about private sessions.
Before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
The positive message is as follows. Always communicate with your higher self. Think positively, access what we call the superconscious mind, the higher self, which during your dream levels at night will raise the frequency vibrational rate of your soul, and it will improve your life physically, emotionally, spiritually, every way you can imagine. And it will get away from you from the negativity and the cynicism and the corruption that you get from governments, corporation, and religion. Those are your enemies. Your positivities is your higher self, the perfect part of your soul that you will eventually merge with when you ascend and eliminate the karmic cycle and rejoin the God energy complex.
Dr. Goldberg, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
My pleasure. Take care now.
You too. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.